smell,
taste,
taste, feel, all that touch. What's the last one? Hearing, right? Ghost. Ghost sounds. It's less funny every semester. You know, the first time I did that, I thought it was super funny. It's just not anymore. Sorry, my sense of humor has changed over time. I don't really watch new movies, so I still have the sense of humor from like Indiana Jones type stuff. So sorry. But these are going to be your 5 senses that are going to be pretty important. Now, granted, we're not going to go over all of these, mainly because we don't have enough time. We could spend a whole semester talking about sensation qualities, because with each of these, there's going to be actually gathering the sense so that you can actually perceive it, primary perception of the sense, and integration of the senses. So it's a pretty complex kind of thing. Right? Sensing external stimuli is not the easiest thing in the world to grasp. So we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about vision and talking about hearing. Those are going to be our 2 basic systems where we will discuss sensation. We might briefly mention some other ones when we get into the digestive tract. We might talk about taste a little bit if we have time, which we should. Maybe some smell too, since that kind of goes along with digestion. Touch is more of a skin thing. We should discuss touch when you go to the epidermis, or the integument completely. Yeah, these are going to be the major things we start with: vision and hearing. Vision is actually kind of fun. I like vision. If you like photography, vision makes perfect sense because it's just a lens system. It's a complex lens system. And if you like that kind of stuff, it's real easy. If you don't like that kind of stuff, it's kind of difficult, because the worst part about lenses, if you've ever taken a physics class, that's where you talk about lenses. Physics is hard. So I really try to not dumb it down, but I leave out all the math, which makes it nice. We won't talk about math at all, because I hate math. But anyways. So we know, because these are sensory organs, they pick up external stimuli, right? So we can have external stimuli. All these senses function to pick up external stimuli. And sometimes the actual mechanisms in which they pick them up are quite elaborate. And they can utilize some different types of nervous tissue that we haven't really discussed before, and some different types of potential gradients that we haven't discussed, and that we will next class. But after a signal is perceived by some type of, we'll call it at this point a sensory structure, that structure has to be carried to the brain. And what carries that sensory information, that external stimuli to the brain? Some type of branch of the nervous system. We can draw a little cell body in a neuron, and we know it's the peripheral nervous system. Well, peripheral. There we go. Peripheral. Peripheral nervous system. We know it's the peripheral nervous system because the peripheral nervous system includes all the neurons but those involved in the brain and spinal cord. And we know that afferent neurons go toward the central nervous system. So these peripheral nervous system neurons that actually take these initial stimuli to the central nervous system are often referred to as afferent neurons. This is terminology you're going to have to be able to remember for this course. It's going to confuse you. Now, the question is, what branch of the peripheral nervous system is this neuron from? There's 2 branches of the peripheral nervous system. What are they? Somatic and autonomic. Now, if you take an A&P with me, you know that somatic are dealing with stimuli and responses that you know you're doing or know you're sensing. Whereas autonomic are things that are happening inside of you that you don't know that are occurring and you can't control. Which is why you have to have 2 branches of the autonomic for checks and balances, kind of like they have their own built-in feedback. Whereas somatic, you understand what's happening. Since these are your perceived senses you actually know are happening, this involves the somatic branch of the peripheral nervous system. So the somatic branch of the peripheral nervous system. Because this is the branch that actually is going to carry these stimuli that you perceive to your brain. And because you're perceiving them, you can actually have your own feedback or control mechanism to stop whatever you're perceiving or doing, because the somatic nervous system typically integrates with skeletal muscle, right? So you see something scary, you move. You touch something and it's sharp, you stop touching it. You touch something and it's hot, you stop touching it. You hear a scary ghost, then you use two senses. You hear a scary ghost, and you run, right? So the somatic nervous system not only typically deals with your special senses, but is also linked in terms of your efferent neurons, or your somatic motor neurons, to skeletal muscle. So, what we know of these afferent neurons, I already used purple. See, like I said, most of the time my colors don't really mean anything. I just like using different colors. But we know that these afferent neurons actually innervate the central nervous system. So they're carrying stimuli, the action potentials, to the central nervous system, which includes the brain and spinal cord. So CNS. And it's not as simple as this. Oftentimes there's multiple neurons on this pathway back to the central nervous system. From the central nervous system, we have efferent neurons. Oops. Efferent neurons that innervate some type of target tissue to elicit a response from that external stimuli in this case. Now, in a lot of cases, the response is going to be, because you perceive the signal, the response is going to be motor. So in 99% of the cases, probably not even 99%, but I like to make up percentages too. In most cases, this is probably going to be, your response is going to be something through the somatic branch of the peripheral nervous system's efferent neurons as well. So your somatic motor neurons that actually innervate only one type of tissue. And what type of tissue do they innervate? Skeletal muscle fibers. However, that's not always the case. These neurons could also innervate tissues that have nothing to do with skeletal muscle fibers, or integrate with tissues that have nothing to do with skeletal muscle fibers. For instance, if you see a scary tiger, you have a visual stimuli, it scares you. Yes, it's going to cause your skeletal muscles to want to move, but that will also send signals down to your adrenal gland to cause adrenaline release and all those things necessary to get away from the scary tiger. There's blood flow to skeletal muscles and whatnot. So lots of different things can happen on this response end. But in general, this is how the nervous system works, right? You have a receptor picking up stimuli, sending a signal to some type of control center, where it integrates that stimuli and comes up with a decision on what should happen because of that stimuli. Then it creates some type of response. Right? So in general, that's how your nervous system works. Hopefully that's primarily reviewed from A&P1. That's pretty general stuff. Now at A&P1, we went into a lot more detail on how actually that individual neurons work. And on your review PowerPoint for today, that I'll post after class, I've given you my review slides for how a neuron works, just so you remember. Am I going to test you on how a neuron works? No, but there are some things in terms of generations of action potentials that are important. You should be familiar with the terminology, because when we get into actually how this works, which is where we're going to spend the majority of our first section of A&P2, this has some different terminology in terms of potential gradients. So being familiar with those terms like gradient potential, action potential, and what's actually going on during those potentials is important. So you should go home and make sure you read that lecture, because that will help you. So, like I said, the big part of this class, or at least the first section, is going to be seeing how hearing and vision is picked up by sensory systems, sensory organs, or sensory receptors, whichever you want to call them. Now, what's neat, though, is that all these, at least vision and hearing, are kind of unique in that they're a little different than what we've talked about with neurons in the past. Because when we've talked about cell bodies and dendrites recepting some type of signal in the past, it's generally been in terms of a chemical signal. But when we're talking about vision and hearing, we're talking about physical stimuli, right? Or with something like touch. So these primary sensation centers are actually important because what they do is they turn what we would refer to as a physical stimuli, so vision or hearing, a physical stimuli, into a chemical signal so that it can be used in your body. And that should be or interpreted by your